Hi, I'm Dr. Cassandra Crifasi. In this next video, my colleague, Dr. McGinty, interviewed me for her course, Current Issues in Public Health. She came to my home and we discussed safe storage and a range of strategies to ensure guns can be stored safely in the home. This video is a nice complement to the lecture on safe storage.
Hi, Dr. Crifasi. Thanks for having us in your home today.
Thanks for coming.
So in addition to being a gun researcher, you're a gun owner.
Correct.
Tell us what you own.
So here are a few of the handguns that I own. I have a Glock 9mm, a Bersa 380, and a Ruger 22.
And those are the brands.
Right, so it's the brand and the caliber.
So how did you get interested in using and owning guns?
So I grew up in a household with guns. My dad was in the Army, so we'd always had guns around in the home for hunting and sporting activities. And it was something I always sort of enjoyed doing as a sport. I did some hunting when I was younger, and then as I got older, I'm a pretty competitive person, so I like going to the range and doing a better job shooting the paper target than my husband.
So there's evidence that safely storing guns in the home can reduce gun-related injuries and deaths. What does safe storage mean?
Sure, so just to go back for a second, so there's a ton of research showing that having guns in the home generally increases risk of injury, homicide, suicide, and unintentional shootings. And for gun owners like me who try to engage in responsible behaviors, we can limit some of those risks by engaging in safe storage. And so safe storage is really a broad term related to preventing unauthorized or unsupervised access. And that can be accomplished in a variety of ways. You can store your guns in a gun safe. You can secure them with some kind of internal or external locking device. At a minimum, storing them unlocked, let me say that again, storing them unloaded and separate from ammunition is sort of the bare minimum to do.
So you've got 3 guns here. When you see a gun, whether it's your gun or another gun, how do you safely handle it? What do you need to do first to make sure that you're not going to injure yourself or someone else?
Yeah, so the very first rule of handling any gun is you always assume it's loaded until you know for sure that it's not. Even if I put it into the safe unloaded, the very first thing I do every time is make sure that it's unloaded. And so always keeping a gun pointed in a safe direction, ejecting the magazine, opening and locking it back to make sure there's nothing in the chamber, and just verifying that there's nothing down in the barrel set to fire. And now I know that this gun is safe to handle.
So, all right, so you've picked up your gun, right? And you've confirmed that it's safe to handle. What else does somebody need to know about handling it safely, using it safely?
Absolutely. So I have young kids, and so I'm in the process now of sort of learning for myself how to communicate to them the safe way to handle guns. And so again, very first rule of guns, always assume it's loaded. Never ever assume that just because something was unloaded before that it's still unloaded. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot. And so whether you're handling it, cleaning it, pulling it from a holster, whatever the situation is, your finger never goes on the trigger until you're ready to fire. Don't point a gun at something you're willing to destroy, because there's no rewind button on a gun. You pull that trigger, a bullet leaves it, and it's going to destroy whatever it hits. And importantly, when you are aiming your gun at something, not only do you need to know what you're aiming at, you need to know what's past it. So if you miss, or if your bullet breaks through whatever you're aiming at, ensuring that there isn't something that's going to be damaged or a person that's going to be harmed past your target.
So we mentioned a little bit about safe storage. Can you tell me a little bit about the devices that you can use with your gun to prevent unintentional discharge?
Sure. So there are a range of options that are sort of external to the gun themselves. So this, for example, is a cable lock. It comes with a key, and you can unlock it, and this would go through the gun and secure, you take the key with you, the gun is rendered inoperable, or at least much harder to use.
Okay.
Another external lock option is what we refer to as a trigger lock. This would cover the area of the trigger. It slides in. It has either a key or a combination. You lock it in place, and then you can't pull the trigger on a gun. There are a couple of internal options. So this is an internal lock. There's a small locking mechanism that is about the size of a bullet. This goes into my 9mm gun. You feed it into the gun, and this goes down the barrel. And as you spin it, it expands inside where a bullet would be fired, and again makes it so the gun can't function.
So it takes up the whole space in there.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it fills up the space and makes it difficult to fire. You can't open the slide or anything. And this gun, this is my Bursa. One of the reasons I purchased this firearm is because it has a built-in lock. So I have a key in my pocket. And right now you can see there's a little notch that says it's safe to fire, or you can fire it, and you can move the notch down to safe. So now the gun, you can't move it.
So there's two little letters on here. There's an F for fire and an S for safe, and your key switches between those two.
Correct. And then in addition, this gun also has a safety. So even with it in the fire position on the internal lock, you can lock the safety down and render the gun inoperable, at least with the safety on, so you can't unintentionally discharge.
So if you were storing this gun, you would lock it in the safe position. But say you were holstering this gun, you would holster it and put the safety on.
Correct.
So let's see some of these locks in action.
Absolutely. So I'll install this cable lock. So again, ensuring that a gun is unloaded.
So that's I never grew up around guns, so
Magazine.
you took the magazine out, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this cable lock will get unlocked, and it runs through the exit channel. So this is where if you were to fire a round, the discharge or the fired round would be discharged out of the side, and a new one would be loaded in. It feeds through the magazine well, and then is locked into place. And now you can't load the firearm. You can't put a round in because it's locked into place, and so it's externally secured and is inoperable. This is the trigger lock. So the challenge with trigger locks is that you need to have the right kind of trigger lock for the shape of the trigger well that you have on a particular gun. So for example, this trigger you can see is sort of square shaped, but this has kind of a round cut out here. So this is not meant for this gun. It can fit, but it doesn't fit or function nearly as well as if you were to use one that was meant for it. Now the challenge with something like this, so it's on and it's locked, and I could change the combination, but you could still, the difference between this and this is I can still move the slide.
Yep.
And so I could still get a round in, and if I were able to break off this trigger lock with a hammer or something, for example, then I could still use the firearm much more easily than something like a cable lock.
So both of these locks would be good for preventing an unintentional discharge.
Correct.
But maybe not if somebody was determined to use the weapon.
Or if it was stolen, for example. This would be, again, could prevent a child or an adolescent from unintentionally discharging the firearm. But if someone broke into your home and robbed you and stole your firearm, they could very easily have that off if they were determined to do so.
And then the last lock that you have?
Yeah, so let me pull this one off because this is specific to this firearm. So this is what is called an internal lock. And so it feeds into, let me make sure I got it down all the way so it'll fit in.
And so you're twisting that to kind of, I'm trying to think of what it would be like, but something that like opens up and then closes.
Yeah, so you think about, this is a little ring, and when it's all the way down, it's very flat, and as you screw it open, it expands to fill up the space. And so it slides in to where the bullet would sit, and you lock the slide forward, and then this slides into the barrel, and you twist, and now you can't open the gun. And unless you have the specific tool that matches like a key, it has a cutout where you have to have the special one that fits the specific thing, and now you can't do anything. Even if you were to put a magazine in, you can't do anything with it, and you would have to destroy the firearm
in order to get
it out, because it's locked into the barrel, and you can't field strip. You can't take a firearm apart without being able to put the slide back, which is prevented by this.
So ideally, you would store the firearm separate from this tool if you were concerned about theft of it.
Correct. Yeah.
So in there, you've shown us a bunch of different locks. What's kind of the gold standard?
So the gold standard would be to lock firearms in a safe. That's the most secure way, because you're not sort of relying on an external or even internal mechanism. So this is a small safe that can be bolted down. So I'm going to lift it up. I don't know if you can see inside the holes. And so this one I took out so you could see it, but you can bolt it down to a dresser, a floor, a drawer, whatever it is, to make it more secure. And all of these other options, the internal lock makes it a little bit more challenging, and the built-in lock, but all these other ones are a little bit less geared towards preventing theft, whereas safes can really get you preventing unsupervised or unauthorized access, and also limiting the ability for someone to steal a firearm. So for example, if I wanted to have a gun ready to be used in self-defense, for example, I could have it stored here with a magazine separate so that it's not in there, and it's locked. And if it's bolted down, no one's going to walk away with it. You can't get into it. And it would take a little bit more to try to destroy this. And then if I got it unlocked, oh, that's not right. Let me try that again. Put in the wrong code. I'm upside down. And then I can open it very quickly and obtain my firearm, and then I'm set and ready to go.
So in the safe, you would store so let's see, this firearm, you'd store the firearm, and then you'd store the magazine next to it.
Correct.
So that when you open the safe, you'd take out the firearm and load the magazine.
Exactly. So if I were storing this, I would have it locked open so I know it's unloaded. The magazine may have rounds in it, but I would not store them inside the gun. I would have them in together and locked. And then if someone were breaking into my home and I was needing to defend myself, in just a few seconds, I could have the safe open, load the magazine, chamber around, and be ready to defend myself. But we also lock all of our doors, and we have a security system, and we have dogs so that we can have lots of layers of protection. And we would call the police. Sure. There was an instance a couple of years back where someone was trying to get into our home late at night, and it turned out, thankfully, to just be a super intoxicated neighbor who got lost. But first thing we did was call the police, and then we sort of triggered the alarm, got a firearm out, had it ready if needed. Thankfully, we didn't need to use it, and sort of that whole situation made us very anxious and uncomfortable at the thought of having to do that. But we took the necessary steps. As soon as the police were there, the firearm went immediately back into the safe, unloaded, and we interacted with the police, and they figured the situation out.
So this is a smaller safe. How do you normally store your firearms in your home?
So I have one safe like this upstairs bolted into our bed frame. We have like a captain's bed with some drawers and space underneath. My husband has one on his side of the bed also. We have different codes. So we, not able to...
So one safe is for you with your code and one safe's for him with his
Correct.
code.
Yeah. So that we, sort of keeping access to our own firearms. And then for some other long guns, rifles and shotguns, as well as the ammunition for our handguns, those go into a bigger safe that we each have, again, one on each side with our separate keys that we keep locked up also.
So we've talked about a lot of different safety practices. Why don't more people do some of these things that you've described?
Couple of reasons. So I think there's a misconception that you can't store your guns in a safe manner and also have them accessible for home defense. And we know from our research that if you're concerned about home defense, you're less likely to store your guns safely. But this is a great option. My husband has another one that's a little bit different style that's even easier to get into. But in a matter of seconds, I can have this out and ready to use. Some of these other ones that are sort of a little bit more external and require maybe a little bit more effort to get the lock off and get the gun ready. This, I wouldn't use a gun if I had something for self-defense. This isn't how I would store it. It's just a little bit more, you have to get the key, you have to unlock, and get everything set to go. But we also know that there are lots of gun owners who don't have kids in the home or maybe live by themselves and think, well, it's just me. There isn't anyone who's at risk of gaining access to my firearms. But that's really where the concept of preventing theft comes in. And so if someone breaks into your home and they're just around the house or in a nightstand or something, it's just too easy for those guns to enter an illegal market. And we know so many guns are stolen every year and then used in crime.
So if you had your guns for, say, sport and not self-defense, this might be a great way to store it because you're not looking to use it suddenly, right? And you're maybe taking it to a range or, an outdoor shooting range or something. And so you could store it here where it's not ready to use. That might be why you'd select this model.
Correct. Yeah. And, something is better than nothing at the end of the day, right? So again, I said sort of at a bare minimum, you want to store your guns unloaded and separate from ammunition. But the cable locks, actually, most guns that you buy in Maryland, you'll get some kind of cable lock, but also...
Like it comes with it when they sell it?
Yes, the manufacturer will send it. But in Maryland, you are required to have an internal lock, the internal lock that we put into this one. And the gun shop shouldn't let you leave the store without the lock and without showing you how to install it, because the goal is to be safely storing guns so that we're limiting access to them by people who might not be prepared to use them properly or who might not really know how to handle them safely.
So the gun that we put into the safe is the one that has the built-in internal lock. But so you either buy a gun that has that, or if you buy one of these other guns that doesn't have the built-in, then you'd be required to you'd buy it with this lock that you put it.
It's about $20.
Seems like a pretty good investment.
It is, and again, because it's internal, the gun, you really can't do anything with the gun. And so this is a great option if you aren't going to be using it frequently or it's not owned for the purpose of self-defense. It's almost impossible for someone who's not authorized to use that firearm in some way. Certainly you can't unintentionally fire it because you can't get bullets into the gun.
So we're both faculty at a school of public health. Obviously, we're interested in preventing, morbidity and mortality. We've talked about some really important ways that we can prevent injuries. What do you think needs to happen to get more people to employ safe storage practices?
I think the challenge is a couple of things. We can focus on policy. So several states have what we call child access prevention laws that require gun owners to store their guns to limit unauthorized access by people under a certain age. The problem there is that you can't sort of go into people's homes and check and make sure that they're storing them safely. And we really don't know that something isn't stored safely until there's some tragedy, whether someone, youth unintentionally injures him or herself or someone else, or a teenager uses it to attempt suicide, or they take a gun from the home and commit a school shooting. So those are some of the things that sort of flag that those guns weren't stored safely. But it's really about encouraging gun owners to engage in responsible behaviors, right? So you're owning a firearm. There are certain things that you should do to limit access, right? If I left my keys in my car and someone drove off with my car and did some harm, right, we would think about holding the car owner responsible for that. And there's some pushback against when a tragedy happens with an unsecured firearm because, the person experienced a terrible tragedy, they lost their child or their child was injured, and so do we really need to sort of push and hold them accountable for that? And I think that kind of sends the wrong message when we're not prosecuting individuals for not safely securing their firearms. And so really, there's the policy angle, but it's about messaging and finding credible messengers that gun owners will listen to is really important. So we hear a lot about physicians. They have a unique interaction with patients and they could use that time to counsel. But we know from our research that very few gun owners see physicians as being credible messengers. Yeah. They're not seen as having experience with firearms. Right. And so groups who do have experience, law enforcement, military, those are the folks that gun owners see as being credible messengers. And if we can get public health strategies and approaches paired with these credible messengers, I think that can be very effective because you're hearing the message about storing your guns safely from people who actually know something about guns.
So you did this important research to kind of identify the messengers. What, in terms of your practice-based research, what's the next step? How do you partner with those messengers? What are you planning to do?
That's a great question. So some sort of informal things we've done, we've been providing some guidance for organizations that have been trying to distribute trigger locks or safes or encourage safe storage, and they were using groups that were not being rated as good messengers. Mm-hmm. And so they were having physicians hand out pamphlets and trigger locks, for example. And I encouraged them to work with local law enforcement to see if they could have the pamphlet have a police officer on it, or have the officer come in and sort of do some education for the physicians, or even be there when the locks are being distributed. And I think there's an incentive for law enforcement also. They're the ones who are responding to these terrible tragedies. Mm-hmm. They're the ones who stolen guns are being potentially used against when they're out responding to crime. And so I think there's an interest from public health to prevent these types of incidents, and I think there should be an interest from public safety to bring these two groups together so that we're preventing theft and unintentional injuries and suicide.
Great. So is there, I guess I would just end with saying, is there anything else you really think our students should know? It's been a great opportunity to kind of see firsthand the concepts that you talked about in your lecture, and things that could be abstract and foreign for some students. I mean, I personally have never owned a gun. It's not something that was in my household. So I really appreciate the opportunity to kind of see this. Is there anything else that you want to tell students?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, right, there are ways that you can have safe and responsible gun ownership that will reduce injury. So yes, there are increased risks of having guns in the home, but there are steps you can take, right? There are things that I would do as a gun owner anyway, keeping them with external locks or in a safe, but I'm so much more vigilant having kids in the home. I teach my kids the rules of gun safety and not to touch a gun without supervision, but kids are also curious, right? And so if they could be trusted to not do bad things or not make bad choices, right? They could go off and live on their own. And so not being dependent upon them moderating their behavior. And so there are some curriculum that exist that sort of teach kids, guns are tools, not toys, and don't touch them, and get an adult if you find one, which is good. But it doesn't sort of acknowledge the fact that kids are curious and are gonna get into things anyway, and that there are steps, not super expensive strategies that we can engage in or practice that will help reduce injury.
Great. Well, thanks for having us in your home today and talking to us about safe storage practices.
Absolutely.